Hi everybody, it's Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio, and today I am working on another sampler quilt. This one is larger. It has 12-inch blocks in it, and I am using 16 blocks total. One thing I'm doing different about this one is the sashing is going to be a low volume sashing, and the border is going to be a pieced border. So it's not going to be a complicated piece border, it's just going to be stripes. And I'm going to use some cornerstones in that outer border with 9-patch units on it. So it's a little bit different from what I've done recently. You know, I've done this, before in the past, but not on YouTube. So that's going to be a little bit different. And these are going to be the vintage quilt blocks. So I'm working on that today, and I'll show you some video of me going through that process. And it's today. I've already got all the pieces cut out, so I just need to sew the sashing onto the blocks and then sew the blocks into rows, and then from there, build out the rest of the quilt with the inner border, the outer border, the cornerstones, that kind of thing. So it's typical assembling a quilt. But today I'm going to start sewing on my sampler quilt, and I've got this one labeled as Vintage Block Sampler number 2. I don't really have a name for it, but this is the pattern that I came up with on EQ8, but I still have blocks left over, so I added more blocks to this quilt, so it's going to be larger, and luckily I bought enough extra fabric that I can do that and still have enough to cover the borders and the sashing. I have enough border and sashing fabric to do that, so, and enough backing fabric and the batting. So I had enough of everything to enlarge this quilt without having to run to the store again, because right now things are crazy out there again, and I'm trying to stay home as much as possible. So okay, so I'm gonna get started. Okay, down here on my pressing pad I have pieces to make the cornerstones, and I have the sashing blocks, and I have the quilt blocks here over to my left, and they're on my long arm table. So I have all of my blocks here, and I sorted them into rows. So here's row 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'm going to have 4 rows of 4 instead of 4 rows of 3. So I just added an extra block to each row. So it's going to make a square quilt as opposed to a rectangular quilt. And I have these all in order from the way I want to place them. And I had these on my design wall, and I arranged them, and then when I got to the layout I liked, I took a photo with my cell phone and then took them down and put them in order, and this way I can always check the photograph to make sure I've got everything the way I want it. So I'm going to get started first by making these cornerstones. I'm going to make 9-patch units with these, and they are going to be, the whites are going to go in the corners and the center, so it's going to look like this. And the reason I'm starting with these is so that I don't lose these little pieces in the process of assembling the quilt top, and that's basically the only reason I'm doing it this way. Normally I would do my borders last, but here we go. Those are the 9-patch units I'm going to do. So I'm going to do 4 of these. So these are all ready to go. I'm just going to sew them into rows and then sew the rows together like I do any 9-patch block. Okay, so there is the 9-patch block that's going to go in the corners. So I'm going to finish the rest of those and then start sewing on the sashing. The sashing is going to go on the right side of the first 3 blocks in the line. In each row is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so I have got the top sewn together, all the blocks into rows, and the sashings taken care of. So what I need to do next is to sew on the inner border. So that is a 2.5-inch border, and the quilt is 54 inches square. So I'm going to get my border pieces and sew those around the top, and then I will work on this pieced outer border. Okay, so I've got the inner border on, and now I'm working on the outer border, and that means I'm going to have to piece some strips together. So I have some 1 7/8 inch strips of my coral color and my background, and I'm going to have 2 corals with the background in between. So I have to piece these together because the fabric isn't long enough to use a solid piece. So I'm staggering the seams that I have here, and so that they don't meet up. So I'm just going to go sew all of these together, and then I will trim them to length and then attach them to the quilt. Oh, now I'm ready to put on the 9-patch units onto the ends of the pieced borders. These are the tops and bottoms of the border. So I'm going to go ahead and take one of these. I've just pressed them and I've measured them against the quilt top. And at the other end, I placed a pin where I need to place the other cornerstone. So I'm going to do this side first and do right sides together. Get rid of that thread and pin everything in place here, matching up my seams. So the seams in the border are matching up with the seams in the cornerstone. Okay, and then I'm going to sew this on. this end lined up here. Let's see how this looks. The thing about these piece borders, you know, this one isn't a complicated piece border, but it does take a lot of time. So probably 3 to 4 times as long as to just put a solid piece on. So that's a considerable amount of time. So I'm getting ready to finish the last border. You know, I've got the piece border pinned on with the cornerstone on this end. So you can see that there. And I've got it pinned down towards the other end. So here is the piece border on this end. So this border needs to end here. And I need to go a 1/4 inch beyond that in order to sew on this corner square. So it ends right here. So I'm going to put a little mark. This is a chalk pen, which let me switch over to a pencil so I can see better. Okay, that's where it ends. I need to go a 1/4 inch beyond that. For my seam allowance, so I'm going to mark that there. So that is where I need to sew in this cornerstone. So I want to make sure I've got it. I want it to end like this. So I've got to, I have to sew the right side of it onto this line. So I'm going to line it up with that second line I drew, which is my seam allowance. And I'm going to pin it right there. And I'm going to pin backwards because I'm going to flip this here. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew down this way, not across that way. So I'm going to flip it over and turn it around. And I want to line it up like this. And I have these seam allowances. Now, these seam allowances here are pressed out towards the pink, and here they're pressed out towards the white, but I need to flip them over, so I'm just going to make them flip over. Place a pin in there, and the same here, because I want my edges, my seam allowances there to butt up. And I'm going to pin that there. Okay. Now this is the pin that I had placed thinking this is where I was going to stop, but you can see I'm off quite a bit. So that's why I didn't cut the fabric there, because it may have been maybe too far this direction. So that should work. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this down here, and I'm going to use a 3.0 stitch length. So in case I have to rip this out and adjust it, it's going to be easier to do. So let me go ahead and sew that in. Now I don't do borders with cornerstones very often because you have all this extra work you've got to do. So I'm usually, I just don't really have the time because it takes a lot of extra time to do this, especially if you do a piece in the border. So this is just, it's not quite basted in. I mean, it's a long stitch, but it's not a basting stitch. It's just a long stitch. So there, that's what I wanted. I've got opposite colors, and looks like my seams are doing fine. So now I'm going to flip this back over onto the quilt, and I want to see if this is going to line up here, and it looks like it does. So that's going to line up fine. So now I can trim this off, and I could take it to the cutting board and do my rotary cutter, but I'm just going to trim like this. And I'm going to save this because I can make some 9 patches out of these. And then I'm going to press. So I'm going to go press this, and then I'll be back, and then I'll pin everything, and then I will be sewing this border down, and the quilt will be ready for quilting. Well, here is the finished quilt top. I think it turned out pretty well. One thing about using a sashing that matches your background, it doesn't show, so you don't have this separation between your blocks like you would if it was a solid color sashing. So it's just a different kind of look. There's nothing wrong with it. I kind of like it, actually. It's just you know, it's different from what I'm used to, which is fine because I don't need every quilt to look the same. So this is just a different look. Now the pieced border, this one is actually a simple pieced border. You're just sewing strips of fabric together, and then doing the 9-patch blocks in the corner, but it does take a considerable amount of time to do that. So you have to take that into consideration when you're making a quilt, is if you want to spend the time on your border or if you want to put it somewhere else. So that's all up to you. But I am happy with the way this turned out, and I hope you enjoyed this video. So if you like this video, please click that like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and click that notification bell so you'll be notified when the next video comes up. And in the meantime, I hope you're all staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. For more quilting ideas, click on the video links. And to keep up with my latest projects, click on the subscribe button. I hope to see you again soon.